to the 5th meeting of the Parking Management Plan City Council Stakeholder Committee. Looking forward to the meeting tonight. We are going to share screen here momentarily and share members of the Stakeholder and City Council Committee who are here on the panel with me. And we'll do a quick round of introductions. My name is Chapin Spencer, Director of Public Works for the City of Burlington. And with me are a couple staff members and consultants. Why don't we do introductions with them and then we'll move on to the committee. Nicole?
Hi, I'm Nicole Loesch from Public Works.
Brian?
Good evening, everyone. Brian Davis, Transportation Planner with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission.
And Jonathan Slayson, the Project Manager with RSG, the consultant.
Great, thank you so much. And for the City Council Stakeholder Committee, Mark?
Sure, I'm Mark Barlow. I'm North District City Councilor.
Great, and I'm just going on my screen. Kirsten, you're next.
Kirsten Merriman Shapiro, citizen member of the committee.
Great. Jack?
Hi, everyone. Jack Hansen. I'm the East District City Councilor and the chair of the Transportation, Energy, and Utilities Committee.
Great, thank you. Max?
Hey, everybody. UVM.
Your audio there cut out a little bit. Max, do you want to try that again?
Ended up muting himself, it appears.
Yeah.
Oh, working.
All right, Max, your connection, the audio sounds broken up.
UVM graduate, resident.
Great, member of the committee, UVM graduate and resident. And you may want to try, if we're continuing to have problems, to turn off your video and we should be able to hear you better. Charles.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Sizemore. I'm the owner of Taco Gordo, which is a business on North Winooski Avenue, and I live on Crombie Street.
Excellent. Well, appreciate it. And thanks, everyone, for being here. And members of the public, thank you for being here. There will be two public forum parts of this evening's meeting. Thank you, Nicole, for pulling up the agenda for today. I will check in momentarily with the committee to make sure there's no changes to the agenda. But the plan this evening is to discuss items raised at the last meeting. And Public Works has a PowerPoint to share with the committee on those items. And then that would be followed by a public comment period. And then at that point, the plan would be to have the committee discuss the updates from the last meeting and the public comments, and consider recommendations for tonight's action, and then have another option for a public comment period prior to any action, and then seek parking management plan stakeholder city council committee action on the parking management plan. And if there are additional next steps that come out of the meeting, we will summarize them at that point. So that is the proposed agenda for this evening. Are there any proposed revisions to that agenda from the committee? Okay, any last changes? If not, I propose that we adopt these by consensus and move into the agenda. So thank you very much. And we will take it at this point. Nicole Loesch is here to provide an overview of an update since our last meeting.
Thank you, Chapin. So the bulk of our presentation today is going to be trying to answer a lot of the questions that we heard last time. So I'm just going to jump right in. We had a lot of questions about what council actually directed the city and the committee to do through the resolution after the corridors transportation study was completed. So Just going to highlight what is in that resolution. I'm not going to read this line for line, but I've highlighted the really relevant pieces here. So the first one on lines 22 to 24 is where it introduces the parking management plan. And so this is where it's directing us to pursue a plan that identifies practical strategies for balancing parking supply and demand north of Pearl Street and set a goal for meeting essential parking needs while freeing up space for dedicated bike lanes. The bike lane recommendation came in on lines 35 through 39, just highlighted at the bottom of the screen here, where it directed us to pursue shorter term improvements in 2021, which were a bit behind because of the pandemic, but those were to include new pavement markings for bike lanes in both directions between Pearl and Riverside. There were some other things to consider with those improvements, but I just wanted to highlight the bike lanes since those have been the biggest part of our conversation. The piece that relates the bike lanes and the parking management plan is highlighted here, where we were directed to delay implementation of the bike lanes until review and approval of the parking management plan. So that's where we are now. And this is just a summary of the committee's role and all of that. And I'm not going to really spend any time here since that hasn't been much of a discussion. So jumping ahead into one of the next questions, have we really defined essential parking needs? So I'm going to try to summarize what we've heard. In terms of what we've heard as a parking demand, we've heard that there's definitely a demand for residential parking and notably south of North Street. We've also heard that there's a demand for community health center visitors and employees at the northern section of the corridor and for visitors to businesses and nonprofits all along the street. And then for the essential parking needs, if we try to distill it down, we've heard that we need to keep access to all of the social services along the corridor. We need to provide residential parking, at least within a block, for low income or BIPOC residents and for residents with disabilities. We haven't necessarily heard that that means that we have to find a dedicated space for every vehicle, but again, ensuring that we're providing residential parking. We've also heard that we need loading for businesses and parking for visitors to businesses. So this is a summary of what we've heard for the parking demand and the essential parking needs. And those are, again, really key things to keep in mind as we come back to the parking management strategies that we have in place to try to account for the demand and the needs. We also had a lot of questions last time about, is North Winooski the right place for bike lanes? So I've highlighted a quote from Director Spencer. This is in a memo that's online as well with all of the meeting information for tonight, but we're really pursuing the bike lanes on North Winooski Ave because having continuous lanes here is really a top priority for the city for a lot of reasons, for our commitment to fighting the climate crisis, promoting public health, achieving a regional transportation system. And to that end, we're really focused on closing the gap that exists between Union Street and Riverside. And we'll come back to this piece later in the presentation, but we do have a recommendation to consider for closing this gap in particular. As you can see in the graphic, we do have a northbound bike lane on Union Street and a southbound bike lane on Winooski Ave. And so we have that paired network in the southern part of this corridor, but we don't have any accommodations to the north. We were asked to look at other routes. Are contraflow facilities safe? Have we considered or could we consider seasonal use of the bike lanes? So we dug into this a little bit as well. And just like with driving, North Winooski Ave is definitely a destination for people biking who live there, who work there, who visit there. So from one perspective, North Winooski Ave is important for those reasons, but also using Hyde Street and Willard Street in particular, which is the closest alternative, has a lot of challenges. There's a difficult intersection at Riverside. It's very complicated to get people across there safely. It ends up being a somewhat circuitous route for people trying to get up to the Riverside area or down towards the Union and Winooski section that have the one-way pairs. And ultimately, it just redirects this parking conversation onto some of those other streets, North Street and North Willard Street in particular. We did do the comprehensive corridor study that looked at all of the different ways we could install bike lanes on North Winooski Avenue. There've been a lot of questions about, can we widen the roadway, take the green belt and the trees? And is that a viable option? And that is something that we did look at, but ultimately the advisory committee, the public feedback we got through that process, and ultimately council opted not to go with that option, which is why we're looking at the option of staying within the roadway as it's currently defined by the curbs. For contraflow lanes, we've actually been using these in Burlington since 2005 or 2006. They're on South Winooski Avenue. And we recently extended the contraflow section when we completed the downtown work. So there's an additional section of contraflow lanes there. So we do have a history of contraflow in Burlington, and they have proven to work very well. We then tried to find some examples of seasonal bike lanes, and we honestly could not find any examples in the United States. What we did find was a lot of research and data around basically having, a lack of infrastructure and poor maintenance were more of a deterrent to riding in all weather conditions than seasonal or just weather constraints. And so what they found is that as infrastructure expands and maintenance gets better, regardless of what time of year, more people bike. And the most data that's available for comparable northern, I shouldn't say comparable, but comparable in a weather sense, northern communities, Montreal, Minneapolis, and Finland have all seen really drastic shifts in their bike ridership, even in winter months when, again, there's more connections and better maintenance of the facilities. So that's ultimately what we as a city are working towards. And it doesn't sound like seasonal bike lanes are really a viable option. We were also asked if we could do some additional outreach and do some additional evaluation of other options to try to regain more parking. So we did some enhanced engagement and did an additional parking evaluation. We made direct connections with all of the large off-street parking owners in the area. Quite honestly, didn't have a lot of luck getting anything secured, but we do have a couple of property owners that are at least willing to entertain some conversations, in particular with the community health center, since their employee parking is such a huge demand in the northern section of the corridor. So we'll continue to work on those relationships and try to connect employers in particular with potential parking opportunities. We also did some direct outreach to our BIPOC owned and our small enterprises north of Union Street. And yes, so we tried to reach them directly. We connected with all but two of them. We left messages and haven't heard back. And then we also did an evaluation with Stantec, which we had referenced, but their recommendation is now included in the appendix that's attached to all the meeting materials tonight. And this was specifically to look at, are there any options to notch in parking? And what we found is that it's definitely not viable north of Union Street. The green belt is too narrow. It would take major reconstruction of the entire, like everything from the sidewalks, outside of the sidewalks in to try to fit this in. And then south of Union Street, there are very few opportunities and it would be quite costly. It's maybe a handful of spaces and still would have tree impacts, utility impacts, drainage impacts. And it's a heavy cost for the few spaces that the city could gain. So with all of that said, those are the main questions that we heard at the last meeting. So we wanted to try to address those before we open it up for public comment. But before we even get there, we wanted to just highlight a big change in some of the recommendations where we think there's a viable opportunity to do a phased approach to the implementation of the parking management strategies and the implementation of the bike lane. And so this really focuses on the northern segment only between Riverside and Union Street. And I might have John, if you could jump in and just recap the actual parking impacts here and the strategies, and then we will keep this going.
Before John does that, I would just insert that this was a decision that I didn't take lightly, that there are two parallel efforts here, a parking management plan and then the overall implementation of the Winooski Avenue corridor study. And in evaluation of all the information that you saw that Nicole has gone through, I have made the decision to recommend to City Council that the implementation of the Winooski Ave corridor improvements be phased. And I feel that that is the wise decision based on data that we've collected on the notched-in parking, the public feedback that we've gotten from many of you and many members of the public, and also trying to coordinate with the paving program for VTrans, and did not feel that if we tried to do everything all at once that we would be able to meet their deadline. So I put together a memo that's in the website here that describes why I arrived at that decision, and hope that the committee will see this as a real indication of us pivoting the recommendation based on conversation and data for how we move to implement the corridor study. So the recommendation that I'm bringing to council really is looking at phase 1, Union to Riverside, and then subsequent phases being south of Union. Thanks, Nicole, and John, take it away.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so everyone should have received the updated parking management plan itself. So the document does reflect this new approach of a phase 1 and then a phase 2 concept. And so the next couple slides just go through the particular elements of the phase 1 proposal, which are focused from that Riverside to Union. And I'm keeping with the same north to south approach that has been used in this. So just to orient ourselves. The phase 1 is proposed to remove 40 spaces out of the 103 on street in this northern area, which is about a 39%. So we wanted to kind of clear the air and make sure we understand what numbers we are talking about before we go into any decisions. The parking model has been helpful to understand what degree we think of capacity exists during the average weekday condition in that area. We believe that there's room to park about 75% of the cars that would be displaced by this phase 1 proposal within the study area. And that would be basically within 2 blocks of your destination. 600 feet was the distance that we had set originally to say that's a reasonable amount that we expect people be willing to walk to their destination. And so that would be greater utilization of some off-street lots, but also greater utilization of side streets. Now, we're also looking at this in the totality of what are the full extent of these changes and what is the magnitude of this effect. And going section by section, we can see that of the northern block between Riverside and Archibald, be 22 spaces on street out of a total of 233 total spaces that are available for the land uses that are immediately adjacent to that section. So it's a 9.5% reduction. And then moving further south, the Archibald to Union segment, it's 18 spaces removed out of that total 293 spaces, and it would be a 6% reduction. In total, the phase 1, when we account for on-street and off-street, it's about a 7.6% reduction is what we're looking at for that phase 1 plan. So some of the strategies that we've just mentioned is that this phased approach is a change. And so we're proposing at this point that is the plan that's being suggested here, is that this phase 1 would be implemented after approval from the relevant planning works commissions and other partners. The city will continue to pursue off-street parking options. I know Director Spencer can talk more about where those are in their current status if there's questions, but to where Nicole mentioned is that there has been direct engagement with a number of landowners, and they are continuing. There is an idea that time-limited parking could be an option to extend on side streets if we are determined that that is a request for businesses. If they're not seeing the turnover in the parking and they're not getting the visitation, then this is one option that could promote faster turnover and greater utilization for visitors, clients, short-term users of the parking spaces. There's also the reduced recommendation to add meters in the phase 2. So in the report itself, it goes into the section, particularly the north to Grant section, where the original strategy was a full-time metered approach. It was brought up at one point during the committee that is a residential parking permit suggested there, and it really didn't get the interest that we maybe had thought about. And so we heard loud and clear that the meters and the short-term parking would be an option that would be tolerable. However, from the public comment, it really appeared that the residential parking needs was important there. So trying to find a balance, particular in that north to Grant section, is that section, rather than full-time meters, it was proposed to basically offset the meters that were being reduced between the Grant and Pearl Street section, and then replace those between the Grant and North section. So the result would be that half of that block would be unmetered, unmanaged spaces that would be available for residents all the time. And then the other half might be meters that would be available for during the weekdays. And then there is an added recommendation that there be an investment made in the Green Ride bike share system near the community health center at the north end of the corridor. So I think here, in summary, the phase one is that the time limited parking meets the essential needs of the visitors and parkings. Is that we clearly heard from a lot of businesses that they need parking. And to get parking, we need to find a way to accommodate the turnover and to give them the frequency of spaces to accommodate the variety of parking needs along the corridor. We would maintain the parking spaces on the west side. That hasn't changed. We would relocate the existing loading zones from the east side to the west side. So that has happened in a few locations, as I think we've discussed where those are. We would allow the unrestricted parking in the evenings and overnights. And the idea is whether the weekends, whether the meters in that southern area apply for Saturdays or not. I think that's up for discussion when the phase two pieces go forward toward implementation, if they do proceed at all. The support for employee parking through existing resources. So I think there is an effort underway that the city is trying to encourage and work with businesses along the corridor to say, how can we support non-vehicle travel mode changes? How can we support walking and biking? How can we find financial mechanisms to provide a transportation demand management solution? So that's what that TDM stands for. And so these conversations with property owners are continuing, and that's where Nicole and Director Spencer are continuing those.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan and Chapin. I think at this point we are ready to turn it over to public comment. And Brian, I don't know if you can help us navigate this part again. See, we have some hands starting to come up, and yeah, if you're signing on, please use the raise your hand feature. If you have called in, you can press *9 and that will raise your hand as well.
And when we get started here, can we get an indication, Brian, of how many people may be interested in speaking? How many people do we have on the call, and whether we need to have time limits to keep things moving?
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining. We've got about 30 people from the public on the call, which is great. More hands keep going up. We're at about 7 now. So I'll call on people in the order I see. So again, appreciate your interest in this. We've got about 9 people, Chapin, so I'll take your sense on this. If we
How about we ask people to keep it to 3 minutes or less if possible, just so that we can make sure we hear from everybody. And there are 2 public forums tonight, so we're just trying to make sure that we can get through everybody and hear everyone for the committee's deliberations.
Great, sounds good. Okay, I'll call you in the order you raise your hand. Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yep. Great. This is Lee Anderson. I'm the owner of Radio Bean and also a resident of North Winooski Avenue. I read Chapin's memo and about the phased implementation, and that is a big relief for me, being on this end of North Winooski Avenue down here. I guess my main question is what is going to qualify phase 2 to move into action? What are the metrics that are going to be being looked at for the phase 1 to implement phase two? And is there a date or a time? Is this like 2023 or something like that, that this would be happening? I can't say that I definitely see the value in looking at that and following the the bike path from Union Street and connecting it to Riverside and connecting downtown Burlington to downtown Winooski, and that does make logistical sense to me, and so I do understand that. But I'm curious also, like, what phase two means and when that would be happening, and what the metrics that are going to be looked at if phase one does become implemented, that would cause phase two to be implemented. So, but I can say that for myself and my patrons and employees and the residents around here, that we're definitely really grateful that at least this summer, we're not going to lose all the parking on that side of the street. And also, that's it, I guess. Thank you all for doing your public service. It's really beautiful to watch. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Lee. And Chapin, I don't know if we want to address those directly or in a follow-up.
I'm flexible just to keep things moving. Maybe we go through all the public comments. We'll probably hear some similar themes. And then I'm taking notes, and I'm sure Nicole's taking notes, and we'll make sure to respond at the end of the public forum.
Sounds good. Thank you. All right, up next, we've got Jeffrey.
Good evening. How's my sound?
Great.
Good.
Yeah, my name is Jeffrey DeSena, quite new to Burlington, and really mostly here just to give some positive feedback on generally the direction that I've seen a lot of the planning and infrastructure headed. We were actually drawn to Burlington because of our ability to get around without a car. I know that's not true for all of Burlington, but walkability and bikeability here has been better than just about anywhere else that I've seen in North America. But I actually started thinking about such things when I lived in Norway and regularly visited friends in Oslo. And I've seen a lot of cities, but if I had to choose, I would say that Oslo is probably my favorite. And I think one of the reasons is, it's striking how quiet a city of over 500,000 people can be. And I assume it's only become more so since I last visited, because Oslo has strategically been removing basically all of their surface parking spaces. It's a piece of a larger plan to make the city more human-centric and less car-centric. There still are cars in the city, but it's really only residents. For commuters, it's just easier to bike or take public transit, and that has made the city both safer and more pleasant. In 2020, Oslo actually achieved Vision Zero. That's zero traffic deaths within the city. That kind of statistic encourages people to get out of their cars and on bikes, which I will gladly argue is good for a long list of reasons, which I think a lot of you understand. But most people aren't losers like me who guide their life based on statistics. Most people go where it's just pleasant to be, and forgive me for being Captain Obvious, but anywhere near car traffic is not a pleasant place to hang out. So here's another obvious factoid: cities aren't loud, cars are loud. That's plainly obvious in cities like Oslo, Copenhagen, and Amsterdam, where bikes dominate transportation. So I'm very much in favor of this redesign of Winooski Avenue, all of it. And if that has to be in a phased approach, that totally makes sense. And I think this is a great step in that direction. I'll probably have some constructive feedback on the particulars, but in general, encouraging cycling while discouraging driving is a win-win-win for everyone, especially the people who really do need to drive and can enjoy less traffic. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. Up next, we've got Josh Katz.
Hi, can people hear me? Great.
Yes.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Josh Katz. I'm the data analyst at CATMA, the Chittenden Area Transportation Management Association, and also resident of the South End and just someone who uses Winooski app to commute to work by bike. So speaking, well, first, I personally, just speaking for myself, am happy to see this project moving forward. As someone who uses Winooski app, I am personally like a pretty competent biker. I grew up in New York City, so I can handle myself, but it could even be scary for me sometimes riding on those streets with no lanes, with no bike lanes. So I'm excited and happy to hear that that is moving forward. Speaking as like a CATMA employee, every year we conduct a fall transportation survey to our members, which are some of the biggest employers in the city, including UVM, Champlain College, like the city of Burlington employees, and the medical center. And we hear almost every year that the biggest factor that would encourage people to bike as a commute mode is better bike lanes. So that is something that we really need to invest in as a city and continue to invest in. And we hear comments constantly like the bike infrastructure is horrible. You want people biking to work, make the right infrastructure. So just really continuing to push that in the right direction is something I appreciate and hope we continue to do. People want to bike, you just have to give them the resources and infrastructure to do so safely. So excited to see this, personally excited to see this move forward. I think as this moves forward, we really need to focus on having better winter maintenance of the bike infrastructure, especially when we're having the two-way lanes on a one-way car traffic street, because I know on Winooski, on South Winooski Ave, which I live right off of, it gets really hard to bike in the winter because the snow is piled up on that in the lane going against the traffic, the northbound lane. So just keeping that in mind as we're implementing this, and excited to see this move forward and create a more bikeable, walkable, human-friendly city. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Josh. Up next, we have Natalie. Oh. Okay.
Hello, you can probably hear me now.
Yes.
Yeah, my name's Natalie Braun. I'm actually a resident of Essex, but I'm coming primarily as an individual who provides some leadership in 350 Vermont and particularly the 350 Burlington node. So I come not only with my own heart on this, but also the energy of many, many members of 350 Burlington behind me. And this has been mentioned, but I want to say how grateful I am. This is an incredibly complex juggling of the stakeholder needs that you have. And I think you have an exceptional plan here at this point, but I commend you for all your effort on this. I'm here, so beyond each stakeholder's concern, the primary concern I bring to you this evening is around the climate emergency that we're in the midst of. And this parking management plan provides an essential, bold and very public demonstration of Burlington's commitment to addressing the climate emergency. And it is for Vermont in particular, supporting the transition to people-powered transport away from the use of fossil fuels is a central feature of addressing in our brave little state the issues of climate change. Many other areas as well are important, but anything that lifts up the option of using transportation other than those requiring fossil fuels will assist in mitigating this accelerating climate crisis that we have. And it also will do the things that two this gentleman, two people before me mentioned all the other positive aspects of having fewer cars and more footfalls and bicycles. So I am fully in support of the parking management plan, particularly the aspects along North Winooski Avenue, and I will look forward to traveling that corridor in the future.
Great, thank you. Up next, we have the initials AW.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my name's Alec. I just put AW because it's shorter and easier. I've lived on North Winooski for the past 6 years or so. And I have you really don't see very many bikers come through this stretch. And but particularly, I mean, from Union up to Archibald. And I have certainly never heard about any accidents or anything like that involved bikers, although it is possible. But like I said, I've lived here for 6 years, never heard anything like that. I had a few questions, but just in response to the last person's comments. In terms of the climate emergency issue, I'm totally in support of finding ways to lessen the impact of fossil fuels. However, what needs to be considered is that if people who used to be able to easily find parking on the street near their house can't find it anymore because particularly in this stretch, it's been basically cut in half as is proposed. If they have to cruise around the block 2, 3, 4 times to find a spot, have to consider what impact that has as opposed to being able to find a spot near their home and park and just go home. That's not, I mean, there's a yin and yang there. And I think, like I said, I'm in support of finding ways to lessen the impact of fossil fuels, but down the line, you have to think what happens when people can't find a spot immediately. So that's just one comment. I don't think this is necessary at all. Like I said, I've lived here for 5 years, never heard about any accidents or anything involved with bikers. You hardly ever see them come through this stretch. I saw in the proposal notes, this is the most populated area in the region or whatnot. And if that's the case, I don't see how making more bike lanes will help anything. People who live here aren't biking through. They're trying to find a parking spot near their house. So I don't really see what, I just don't think this is necessary. So if the goal, it seems like the goal is to make it easier for people who don't live here to bike through, which thus makes it harder for people who do live here to find a parking spot near their house. That seems backwards to me. And I just made a whole bunch of bullet notes as I was listening to all this, so I'm sorry if I'm cruising through it quickly. I don't see how this is going to help businesses. I mean, bikers aren't really biking down to these businesses that are on the street on their bikes. People are driving down here. There's a garage, there's a food place, there's restaurants. It's not, people aren't really, again, I just don't think it's that necessary. I can understand from, say, Archibald over to Winooski across the bridge having a bike lane, but in this small stretch from Union up to Archibald, there's 2 large apartment buildings here, which is a small stretch with a lot of people living here, and cutting the parking in half. I just don't understand how that, it just doesn't make sense to me. Just a couple more here. Time limited. Well, if this goes through and the, will all the remaining spots be metered and time limited? Because that adds obvious constraints to people who live here, need to run out to feed the meter. Just seems more complicated than is necessary. Where is the proposed additional off-street parking? And I was curious if anyone on the council or who is in support of this lives on these streets, and if they have to park on the street or if they have parking behind their house or whatnot, because that seems like something to think about. And lastly, I was curious how much total money these various studies and evaluations cost the taxpayers. Thank you.
Great, thank you for your comments.
We'll be answering the questions at the end of the public forum, just to remind folks that we'll give time for all the input, and then we'll take notes and respond. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Chapin. Up next, we have Sarah.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm a resident of School Street, right by the intersection there. And yeah, as a biker in Burlington, I really do often find myself dodging cars or just feeling unsafe in different types of situations due to a lack of essential bike infrastructure. And I really do think that expanding bike infrastructure is not only an issue of sustainable transportation, but also one of equity, because not everyone can afford or physically drive a car, and folks who aren't able to do that should not be forced into danger to allow for more parking for people who can drive. Burlington really does pride itself on being a bikeable and safe city, so we should be taking every step that we can to make that the case. If we're going to claim a status as a bikeable city, we have to do the work to make that the case. And yeah, I've known too many people who don't bike out of fear due to a lack of essential bike infrastructure. And it's true, and I think very clear, that expanding that infrastructure will have an impact that a lot of people might not think makes sense, but it just totally does. I mean, as you expand bike infrastructure and make Burlington more bikeable and green, you generate more bikers and make Burlington a much more enjoyable place to spend time and live, and also set an example for many other cities across the country. Yeah, I've also, in that particular area, got into a bike accident before, and I know that many folks have said that they don't think it's necessary, but yeah, in that particular stretch of road, I think that it could be super useful to have a bike lane, in my experience. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. Up next, we have Dan.
Hi there, thanks for having me. My name is Dan. I'm a resident of Burlington in Ward 4. And I think as much on-street parking as possible should be removed for bike lanes for lots and lots of reasons. The number one for me is the climate crisis. Our climate and ecological systems are collapsing. I worry about climate change. I became a father last year, and I work for a nonprofit doing climate change education, connecting teachers to resources to teach about it. The biggest sector of emissions in the United States is transportation, and the largest chunk of that sector is personal vehicles. And so we have to get as many personal vehicles off of the roads as possible, as quickly as possible. And so in addition to the climate crisis, which is number one, it would make a safer Winooski Avenue. People would be safer biking and walking. It would be a more equitable transportation system for those who cannot afford to drive a car. It would be far quieter. Like the gentleman said before, it'd be much more enjoyable to be outside. The air would be cleaner. There would be less air pollution, less ozone, less particulate matter, healthier lungs, healthier children. And I wholeheartedly support removing as many parking spaces as possible, as quickly as possible. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dan. Up next, we have Beth.
Hi, thank you. Appreciate you guys sitting through another set of comments. Again, this is Beth. I'm on the lower block of the northern part of North Winooski Avenue, down below North Street. I want to say, first of all, that I appreciate the recommendation, the recent recommendation to pause on our block and the block south of ours. I understand from the report and the letter that the future plan remains that the parking on the east side up in the north will be removed or eventually down in ours as well, with potentially meters being installed. I'm concerned what the plan is to determine what will happen after that, where people will move their cars. I assume that will be still to be discussed. We also need to talk about how to improve public and multimodal transportation for sure. I appreciate that there's been outreach to some of the businesses and service agencies along the northern part of the corridor. I realize that's happened somewhat recently. I think I've mentioned this before. I'm a board member at the Community Health Center. Coincidentally, this is the second month in a row that I'm missing the board meeting to be here with you. You might hear it happening in the background. I've expressed concerns about how the parking pressures are going to access or may impact access to care, and I think CHCB will probably be speaking to that again tonight. I still don't get the sense that there's been secured options for businesses up north from us, and I've heard a lot of the concerns from those businesses continue. I can't yet fully support the parking plan, even with the how much I appreciate the recent compromises that have been introduced. But it's important to me to know that our entire corridor will meet the needs of bikers, walkers, people with physical disabilities, residents, and of course, people who need to access services and businesses. I work in disability services. I've worked in this field for about 30 years, and one of our tenets is nothing about us without us. And when I look at this, what's happened here, so many people didn't know about what was happening on our street, despite being told that there was lots of opportunities for them to know it. I think more people who live on the street needed to be involved in the conversation. You know, it seems to be an assumption that people wouldn't be on board with new ideas or perhaps aren't sophisticated enough when it comes to speaking about the climate crisis to talk about it or be involved. But encouraging people is meaningful, and forcing them into something they're not prepared for doesn't necessarily work. And I wonder if we hadn't spoken up, what would have happened? I'm concerned again why people who live in this area, the most dense part of the corridor, weren't invited to participate. And I think, you know, it's totally understandable to me that people who have supported this and who have waited a long time are frustrated by the additional delay. There's been so much work done on it for a long time, and I appreciate each one of you and your investment and the time that you've put into this. I know it's a lot. The updated proposal, as well as Chapin's letter and recommendations, demonstrate that you've been listening to us, that you appreciate where we're coming from, and to say that I appreciate that. I would say that I don't think that the problems that we're encountering here should be solved on the backs of Old North Enders without their participation and, again, without their buy-in. I know and I agree that having a biking corridor is important. I know it's wanted, and I know how important it is to have better bike safety. But the decision to put it in and to change the street to accommodate a bike lane and losing half of the parking was made without the input of our residents and our businesses, despite so many of our attempts to be heard. It wasn't done with us. So I thank you again for hearing us. And once again, I'd ask for a pause for the whole plan for us to discuss it more and to come up with solutions together. Please keep listening. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Beth. Up next, we have Jason.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Jason Stuffle, and I live on Colchester Ave. And I think I've been through a similar situation as this, is we put bike lanes in on Colchester Ave and removed parking. I removed parking directly in front of my house. That was convenient for me, but put that, you know, kind of in context to the neighborhood and people who want to commute through the area and people who live in the area who want to commute. And so I walk, I bike, I take public transit, I use my own vehicle. And when we removed parking off the road, it made it safer for, you know, emergency vehicles, the fire trucks, the ambulances coming through the area, and people had to change their habits. And that's hard for people sometimes. You want to just stay the same, but in order to move forward with making our public right of way, that's for everybody, safer and not store public, you know, public area having private vehicles stored on it, we have to make a little bit of a change. And so I encourage everyone to vote tonight to make a little change forward, and it won't be perfect. It's never perfect, but we can go from there and continue to work on that, because people in the area need to be able to walk and bike, even if you have a vehicle, because once you get to some place, you're not parking directly in front of it and you have to walk or bike. And, you know, I bike to Old Spokes home and it's hard. It's hard to get my bike there to get it fixed, but I also bike to Taco Gordo and get some food. And so that's, you know, I understand both of those, you know, viewpoints, but I think, you know, we have to try and make a change forward for the better use of everyone. And I think that is removing some of the parking. It'll be a little hard, but, you know, we'll take steps forward from there. So I'll leave it at that, but I just encourage you to think about that we removed parking on Colchester Ave and it was hard, but we're at a better place now that we've moved forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Up next, we have Jean.
Hello. Can you hear me? Everyone's
Yes.
asking. Thanks. So I just wanted to sort of comment on a few things. I'm a resident on North Winooski Avenue, and just to sort of respond to the previous speaker, I certainly, as a biker, understand where he's coming from. I think, like, when we try and compare streets across our city, though, we run into the difference in their usages. So I think about Colchester Avenue, which has, you know, a cemetery and a forest on a big stretch of one side of it, on which the bike lane is put. And, you know, our street in many places has two sides of densely populated apartment buildings, many with, you know, that are occupied by 4 or 5, even 6 residents in each unit. Many of us do, of course, walk, bike, and have cars. But what worries us about plans that get rid of parking is that it seems to insist that we don't have cars, that we can't have cars. And as you know, I completely want us to fight climate change, but sort of in agreement with somebody who spoke before, I don't want it to be on the backs of our more vulnerable Old North Enders. I think the first thing, there's a big difference between a cycling culture like Amsterdam, for example, which was, I think, brought up earlier, and Burlington. And the difference isn't more bike paths. I mean, obviously climate is climate, but we are the largest city in a rural state, and it's a really different circumstance than living in a country like the Netherlands, where you can get from village to village by train. We just don't have the infrastructure, and many of us, for work, family, necessity, need to leave Burlington, and for that we need a place to put a car, such that we can, as much as possible, not drive it. You know, and I think, like, you know, we have this 19th century housing system where most of us live in converted houses that were built before there were cars. So it's just simply not an issue of residents being greedy or something. We just live in an old place where the infrastructure for cars isn't there. And so currently the already paved locations on which we can park are absolutely vital. A third point I wanted to make is, you know, I am a biker. I bike to work. I bike to UVM from North Winooski, and I have at times felt safe on my bike, but it is almost always because of the condition of the road, the surface of the road, because of ice, snow, potholes. I don't know if anyone's recently biked up Pearl Street, where there is a bike lane, and one side of the street has no cars, so there is a bike lane. It is what the goal of this whole project is. But the street is not plowed to the curb. And so you bike either on the line, at the edge of the bike lane, or in the middle of the road and weaving around potholes. And, you know, when we think like where accidents have been shown to happen, I think I've said this before, but it's in the intersections. The heat map for the study shows that it's in the intersections. And that's why, if I recall, the original council request was for roundabouts in order to help the safety of those intersections where the majority of accidents happen, if they happen at all north of Pearl Street. The heat map shows they were primarily south of Pearl Street. But those were discounted because of space constraints in the intersections. It wasn't practical. And I'm just not seeing how bike lanes on North Winooski Avenue is any more practical, because we still don't have answers about why North Union's dedicated bike lane isn't adequate if the goal is to have a dedicated bike lane connection between downtown and the city of Winooski. I'm still very concerned about the residents and business owners north of me. But I do see that, like, if the goal is a dedicated bike lane connection, then why is phase 2 necessary? Thank you again for all your help, and we do feel listened to and included, and we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Up next, we have Liz.
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just want to really thank Chapin, especially for your leadership, and the committee for listening and for you know, really stopping the process that was in play and turning your attention to the people who have come to express their concerns. And I feel like, you know, you have taken us seriously, and you've taken seriously all the issues and concerns that have been raised. And this process shows what's possible when the city does include the voices of neighbors. But I would echo what Beth and others said about, you know, how hard it was to get people's attention after the January 2020 resolution passed. You know, for me, I'm a white, privileged, middle-class, able-bodied, educated person. And this process is like, I can do this in my sleep, and I can bike in my sleep. I mean, I have no problem, you know, with wanting bike. And we all want bike infrastructure. We all want safe bike infrastructure. We all want to solve the climate crisis. It's, you know, what I think for me is hard that I see a city, I see people with power and privilege, you know, not remembering we have systems of inequality, and that many voices and people are invisible because of the color of their skin, or that it's not safe for them to show up, or they don't, or they use a wheelchair. And safety means something really different for people of color and people who use wheelchairs and LGBTQ+ people. It means something really different when it comes to something like cars, when it comes to something like the distance between, you know, where you park and where you're going. And when you know, when you're a Black person driving around the block, and like a, you know, Black woman grad student got pulled over by a cop a couple of weeks ago, you know, and it's just like that kind of stuff. So when people talk about safety, I think we all really need to remember our privilege and check that. But you know, it's also easy to dream about Oslo and having a great subsidized public transportation, you know, system. But that's not who we are. And I feel like, you know, just like white people created racism, our automobile industry and land use planners created the spatial jobs mismatch and created a transportation system that doesn't work. And we have a capitalist system that doesn't subsidize public transit. So we're all a part of that. And just because people use cars doesn't mean they have to bear the burden of the climate crisis solutions that they are not asked to help solve. And especially just because, you know, when you blame cars, you're blaming people. And the people in this neighborhood are the people who have the least resources to help solve the climate crisis. And a just transition recognizes that. And I would like to ask the city to adopt the principles of a just transition, which say that the people who are most impacted by the change, by the transition, not impacted by climate crisis, but are most impacted by the transition, are the people who should not be left out of the process and should not be left out of the solutions. And that's what I feel like has been going on here. So I appreciate you slowing down, but my concerns about, and I think it's going in the right direction. And specifically, even though I feel like it's a shame Pat Bannerman had to appear on the 6 o'clock news to get everybody's attention, and that the committee didn't go talk to her first. You know, when we think about what Pat needs, she is probably going to be fine with her customers parking across the street on the west side of North Winooski. That's probably not the problem. But she's going to be competing with all the other cars from the new Richard T. Kemp Center, from Fo Hong, and from low-income tenants who live in those brightly colored pink buildings, some of whom have hidden disabilities. So, you know, all those people in that block, we're talking about, like, you know, this is the downtown of the Old North End, and it's the downtown full of low-income tenants, low-income business owners, immigrant business owners, and people who aren't, you know, inclined to use the bike lane most of the time. So when the city creates your parking plan for the West, I strongly support what Beth said, that there should be no change until you have signed agreements for community health center and for outright and for legal aid, so that those that competition is reduced. The competition for spaces is reduced. And there's a sure plan, there's a framework for that plan, and that it's on the record and everybody's, you know, good with it. And then that will reduce the competition for those spaces on the West. I also noticed that there should be parity across the city. The parking spaces in front of dealer.com all the way to Daedalus are all free 1 and 2 hour spaces. And so I would be vehemently against any meters going in here, as long as the wealthy white middle-class businesses on Pine Street have free parking. That is not parking parity. So I think we need a principle of parking parity, and nobody should be charged for parking in a poor neighborhood if you're not charging them in a rich neighborhood. And there's only one ADA space in front of Pathways, and legal aid is going to lose their ADA space. So there's got to be more ADA spaces on the west side as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I see Jeff.
Hi, can folks hear me?
A little quietly, but let's give it a shot.
I will try to speak up.
There we go. That's good.
I'm Jeff McKee. I'm the CEO of Community Health Centers of Burlington, and a Burlington resident since moving here about 18 months ago. And I know this conversation's been taking place for a lot longer than I've been involved, and I do truly appreciate the time and energy the committee has committed to ensuring that we emphasize doing the right thing over doing it right now. First of all, CHCB is an enthusiastic supporter of the goals of the city's initiative to support a healthier environment, encouraging healthier communities, and developing more pedestrian and bike-friendly neighborhoods. We love that concept, and we will support it wherever we can. But we cannot support the original or current phased implementation plan because it will have a very significant and direct negative impact on the most vulnerable members of our community who live, work, visit, and seek vital healthcare services in the Old North End. What we've been presented, what we've had presented to us in terms of the plan less than 2 months ago is not a parking management plan. It's simply a parking reduction plan with the hope that parking solutions will emerge. Hope is awesome, but it is not a plan. Just within the past week, we've been truly pleased that the city has reached out to begin conversations about how we might develop alternative parking solutions. And irrespective of the direction taken on this specific initiative, we're very pleased to be partnering with them on developing solutions. But let's be really clear. None of the conversations we've had with the city or neighbors to date should give anyone optimism that solutions will be developed within the immediate future. Creating a true plan simply takes more time. And if we if and when any alternative parking options emerge, the idea that a nonprofit such as ours can simply make a large capital or operational investment is entirely unreasonable. We're struggling to fill critical staff positions because we can't keep pace with wages. Every dime we spend on parking is one that doesn't end up in the pocket of our staff. I'm confident that we can get there together with the city over time, but implementing this so quickly harms our staff, harms our organization, it harms our community who relies on us for healthcare, and harms our neighbors who will bear the brunt of the parking reduction. When parking disappears on North Winooski Avenue and the remaining spaces are converted largely to time-limited spaces, our staff will begin scrambling for all-day parking in front of every home within a 10-minute walk from here. Not because they want to, but because there has not been time for other solutions to be developed, vetted, and implemented. And they have no other choice. So while the phased implementation plan is ostensibly designed to lower the impact on residential neighbors, it will have the exact opposite effect. We absolutely want to reduce our parking footprint, and we want desperately to reduce our dependency on street parking. But there's just no possible way I can get all that done this summer. We need more time, and we need the city's continued support to work with all of our neighbors to find actionable solutions that balance the needs of all of the stakeholders. So I appreciate you hearing me out, and thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Up next, we have Thomas.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you. So, yeah, I'd like to ask whether this plan is just, whether it's socially just. And I think the way we can look at that is see who stands to benefit from the plan and who stands to be hurt by the plan. And it seems to me that the people who stand to benefit are those who commute by bike downtown, perhaps people who own homes further afield, and the people that stand to be hurt by the plan are local residents, renters, and small business owners. And if you look at what's happening to our neighborhood as a whole, I think that this plan is going to enhance the forces of gentrification. It's going to drive out current residents, people who rent here and are able to, because they are able to park on the street. They need their cars. If they're not able to park here, they will move. They'll be forced out of the neighborhood, increasing gentrification. And the small business owners that we know and love, some of whom are immigrants, people of color, they're going to be harmed by this plan. So I don't think this plan is socially just. And I think that progressives should be particularly concerned by that. The other quick comment I'd just like to make is there seems to be this idea that all that stands between Burlington and the cycling culture of somewhere like Amsterdam is that we don't have enough bike paths. This is absurd. The climate is totally different. The situation vis-a-vis public transit is completely different. Somewhere like the Netherlands has incredible rail networks, tram networks that can take you wherever you want to go in the country. We cannot get to the majority of our state without a car. If you live in downtown Burlington and you want to visit anyone else in the state effectively, you need a car. This is not a situation where a few bike paths are going to make the difference. The climate is completely different, and the rural nature of our state and the lack of public transit is just, we're not going to get there by building bike paths. That is my contention. So thank you for listening to me. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Thomas. Up next, we have Sandy.
Okay. Hi, I'm with Vermont 5350, and I just wanted to encourage you to improve some version of the parking management plan. It sounds like it's in need of a few changes, but I think we need to move forward in general. And that's basically where I'm coming from. I agree that is a huge problem and it's complicated. And I think we do need more alternatives to cars. My problem with bike lanes is that if they're not designated just bike lanes, the so-called multi-use paths are dangerous. I've seen bad accidents happen on them. If you do a bike lane, make sure that it's separate from people walking. This is going to be a difficult transition, and I just applaud you moving forward. And I wonder if there isn't someone somewhere else closer to home that could give you more ideas about how to do it that isn't Amsterdam. The name Buttigieg, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce his name, comes to mind. Maybe there's another town that's further along than us that could give you some ideas about how to do that. But I am concerned about people who don't have cars. What are they going to do? And I'll just stop there because, like I said, it's complex, and I wanted to speak up in favor of both just transition and also the parking management plan, however imperfect it might be. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy. And those are all the people who had hands up. So thank you all for attending and for your comments.
All right. Thank you, Brian. I think we're moving into committee deliberations at this point. So can we maybe reduce the presentation so everybody can see one another? Excellent. And we have two additional members of our committee that have come since we started the meeting. Welcome, Councilor Stromberg and Kelly Dugan. Thank you both for being here. It appears we've got a full committee attendance tonight for this important conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to the committee. Are there members who want to jump in?
Can you, so is this time, I'm sorry, can I just see the agenda again? I just want to make sure I understand the process going through the rest of the evening.
Yeah, give me 1 second to get back there.
Sure.
Yeah. Just scroll way back up here. Too far. There we go. So our intent here is to have a discussion now, have another round of public comment if you'd still like, and then revisit again any final discussion before we take any action.
Okay. So I just wanted to be clear, like if this was the time to share or ask questions relating to the plan itself, potentially.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. And as you were asking that clarification, which was helpful, I realized that we did not do what we promised, which was to provide quick answers to the questions we heard during public comment. So is it friendly to the committee if I take a few moments with staff? Great.
Yeah, please.
Great. Kicking off, Lee Anderson asked in the beginning of public comment, is there a date or time for phase 2 and what are the metrics? And the response is that there is no firm plan at this point. This concept of a phased implementation is something I put forward in the memo and brought this evening. My expectation in working with council would be to allow phase 1 to function and to see with that continuous facility, part of it being directional, a northbound lane on Union and a southbound lane on Winooski from Union down to Pearl, that this would give us a chance to try out that scenario. And based on feedback on that installation, based on potential improvements along the corridor, securing other funding, there are a whole suite of considerations that would help us determine when and how to implement phase 2. So the proposal that I am recommending tonight is really to focus on phase 1 and to leave phase 2 for a subsequent conversation. Alec W. asked, will all spaces be time limited and metered? The answer to that is that some spaces would be metered. Those are predominantly the ones north of Grant Street, up part way to North Street. There would be a number of time limited spaces sprinkled throughout the corridor to encourage turnover, but that there would also be unregulated spaces available 24/7 for residents. Alec W. also asked, where is the proposed off-street parking? And the answer there is there is no additional off-street parking secured at this time. We are talking to property owners predominantly in the northern section of the corridor between North and Riverside, as that would be where phase 1 would be implemented, where the greatest parking pressures would occur with that removal on the east side. Going down, Jean Bissett asked, why is phase 2 necessary? I think that the question here is to allow phase 1, if phase 1 is implemented, we can evaluate how phase 1 creates a continuous facility and whether or not it is sufficient or whether we need to create a more direct route up and down North Winooski and South Winooski Avenues. So I think the jury is still out on that conversation. It was a recommendation in Plan BTV Walk Bike to have continuous facilities on North Winooski. And so we would be wanting to evaluate the phase 1 and whether phase 2 it was necessary. Those were the questions. And then Thomas Pashby asked whether this plan is socially just and then provided his commentary. There is a section in the plan on the equity component and evaluation of this project, looking at vehicle ownership in the Old North End and vehicle access and parking availability. This is a complex issue with a broad array of individuals, some who are mobility challenged, who need vehicles to assist them moving, and then there are folks who don't have access to vehicles and require other ways of getting around. So I do acknowledge that this is not a simple calculation here. Those are the questions I heard. Staff or consultants, did I miss any? Great, thanks for indulging me with going through that, Kirsten and the rest of the committee. We're up for your deliberations.
And I would encourage everyone, if you have any questions, additional comments, this does not have to be a formal process of going through everyone. So feel free to jump in. Kirsten.
I have a few, but first I would like to start with sharing a couple of things. So I also, not only am I a citizen of Burlington, I like to bike. I'm not against bike lanes. I am concerned about the removal of parking here without addressing the essential parking needs of the social service providers, but also some of the small businesses, as well as residents that live there that may not have the mobility choice to ride a bike as an option, right? Not everybody is physically able to ride bikes as well to get places. And I think some of the other folks who spoke earlier really talked to some of those concerns and challenges. I also work for Champlain Housing Trust. And I wanted to share that, in this area, our tenants, 93% of them are at 65% or less of median income. And 55 or 83, I think, are below 55% of median income. And so that's considered income burdened, right? Housing burden. People are really at a lower income and really don't have access to the resources that many of us do have access to. And that is a concern. I would also say that among our tenants that live in the study area, over 46% of them are non-white. And I would also say that over 14% of our households have 4 or more people in those households. So we do have still a reasonable amount of our tenants who have larger households. And so having a vehicle and a bike for transport is not always, vehicles may be necessary, and using bikes to transport a large family is not always an easy task, I would say, or something that people can actually do. So I just wanted to share that because to me that also gets to some of the equity we talked about. And the report focused a lot on racial equity, but I think there's also economic equity here that we're talking about. And I also think it's really important to remember that we have a lot of social service agencies along this corridor. And they located here over many years because there was a density of population. It was important. The city at that time, 20 years ago, was recognizing this corridor needed reinvestment. It was an opportunity to bring services closer to the people who needed them, decreasing their travel time perhaps even, and making it more easily accessible. And so they've made those investments and they have located on this corridor. And I still hear, even in the phased approach, the phase 1 is still going to impact them. In the report, I don't really see the acknowledgement of that impact. In the executive summary, it doesn't even mention it, that people have brought this up time and time again, the impact that would have on their clients, the people who use their services, and that this is actually creating additional burdens and barriers to people who want to use the services provided by Outreach, Burlington Children's Space, Feeding Chittenton, Legal Aid, Pathways, and the Community Health Center. And during the pandemic, the Community Health Center's only seen, and so are these other agencies, have only seen the need in our community grow. And so it is very concerning that doesn't seem to be acknowledged anywhere in the report. And in fact, as you get into the details of the phase 1 and the parking management plan itself, particularly as you're talking about the segments, starting on page 70, you do mention the Community Health Center, but then in the next section, between Archibald and Decatur, there's no mention of all of the social service agencies that are located on that section of the block too, and the impacts that will happen and the challenges that it presents to them to provide these services to members of our community. So I think that it is probably incumbent, or would be a good idea, to at least acknowledge that in there, so that it would give a more well-rounded picture of the challenges and opportunities. And specifically, it's just not mixed use. There's specific uses, and we know some of them. We actually know all of them. It's not that many. So I would ask the team to really look at that and to think about that. as we go forward and as you're finalizing this report. I think some of the equity analysis really does miss some of the things that I think about when I think about equity. So I think about equity as everybody has access, more balance to all modes. And so I just want to reiterate that. I know that Chapin, Director Spencer has really worked hard to reach out to the 8 entities that he listed in his memo. And I believe at this point, 6 of the 8 are firm no's, and 2 have not yet said yes, unless there's some new update that I'm not aware of. So that concerns me when we talk about ameliorating impacts to the businesses at the northern end of the avenue by counting on off-street parking that has yet to materialize, right? Or has no certainty at all, right, at this point today. Unless I'm incorrect, and please, if something has changed, I'm glad to hear that.
Still talking to 3, but appreciate your comments.
Okay. And then I'm a little thinking about reaching out. I had asked for a little more detail on the outreach to the 9 businesses that had sent letters to the committee, as well as the petitions from, we also had petitions right from the neighbors, but those were letters, and I know there was some outreach there. Maybe you could illuminate us to the details of that outreach. It didn't seem like, it seemed like it was a mixed bag. Yeah.
Yeah, I can try to give a quick update. Yeah, it was, I think that's fair. It was mixed feedback. We, of the 9 businesses that we did reach out to, we did speak with 7 of them. And I would say 3 of them were still concerned. 2 felt neutral about the changes. And 1 thanked us for stopping by, but didn't have anything else to add or any additional questions. So yeah, mixed feedback there, and 2 that we haven't directly connected with yet.
I want to let some of the other committee members have some time. I have a few more comments, but I want to give other people some time.
Thanks, Kirsten. Anybody else from the committee have questions or comments at this point? Councilor Hanson.
Okay, I'll just continue then. Oh, Jack, go ahead.
Oh, no, I just wanted to, I think something we haven't really talked about in this committee that someone commented in the chat that's really important is the feedback that we've gotten, especially in the survey that we've relied upon, is very skewed towards car owners in a way that doesn't represent the population. So like the people who respond to the survey owned cars at a way higher rate than the actual neighborhood. So yeah, I think to Michael's point, how are we weighing the feedback of the huge chunk of folks that don't own cars in the neighborhood? How are we ensuring that that's being represented?
I don't know if that's a technical question or how it's being represented, Councilor Hanson. As I think we've seen, there are impacts to removing parking, and we're not replacing all the parking that's lost. We're not adding more spaces. And so we've been dealing with trying to meet the needs of those existing residents and businesses. In terms of the data that goes into this and understanding how many households may be living without a vehicle and understanding how the travel behavior currently occurs along the corridor, I think we we have done our, I think, best to represent this in an accurate way. We have public census data that's available to us, and that's where I believe that the comment is referencing. There's a figure 9 in the report, which shows the number or percentage of households that are in those census tracts that were, per census data, estimated to not have a vehicle. And this is the highest rates of zero vehicle households in the state in this area. There's maybe a population just across the river, but including Winooski and North Winooski Avenue in Burlington, this is the highest percentage of households that have zero vehicle households. There may be a pocket in Barry as well. The survey data that was taken was done in a way that we were able to represent the census characteristics of the residents. And per that, I feel confident that we were representing the average vehicle rates appropriately. I don't know if I fully agree with the representation of those magnitudes of who was represented or who wasn't. But I believe that the data that we're showing as to who lives there, how they're traveling, how they're getting to work, those are represented accurately as far as professionally from my point of view. And if there's questions about that data, I'm happy to dive in and answer any questions with any individual.
Thanks. That's helpful. I think we often are undercounting that population, the population that doesn't own vehicles, and it's underrepresented throughout this process. And I think a lot of the framing around this has been, this is good for climate, it's good for safety, it's good for XYZ reasons, but it's inherently going to harm people's ability to get around. Or normal people's ability to get around. I think we've kind of created this narrative that, to some extent, we've sort of, we've discounted or undercounted the fact that a lot of folks, a huge percentage of folks, a huge chunk of people do get around without a car, and this is going to make it easier for them to access these services and get around. But thanks for clarifying that.
Councilor Barlow, jump in.
I would just say that I appreciate that you're using the data that you have, right, of the census tracts, but there's a level of granularity that sort of is lacking there, and detail that is often, I think, missing. I was really pleased and had a chance to talk to Kelly Dugan about the One Mobility audit that came up at the last meeting, because it was really eye-opening for me to go back and take a look at that. And one of the things I just want to share that's in there, what kinds of infrastructure improvements would make getting around easier, is people said better sidewalks, number one. Number two is better sidewalk snow removal. Number three was having my own car. Number four is bike lanes. And 5 is crosswalks. And there were other recommendations there to improve safety, which was lower traffic speeds, protected bike lanes or the use of sharrows, crosswalks, wheelchair accessibility, better maintenance of the road, better bus headways, better transit. So those are all things that I think also should be informing sort of where we're at and what we're thinking here.
So I'm encouraged by, where we are tonight in this conversation. I think, I don't think we have a totally workable solution yet, but I think it's come a long way since the last time we talked. And I too really appreciate the work that Director Spencer's done, trying to square the circle on this one, and also all the outreach he's done for to the potential parking solution providers and to the businesses. But one of the things as I think about this is, and I think one or more of the public commenters mentioned it, is you wonder whether or not this is phase one or if this is the solution. If we can figure out how to provide adequate parking for this part of the corridor that we're considering for phase one, if we could figure out adequate parking for that, and if it worked out, we may have the suitable biking infrastructure that I think we all want, that would make it safer for cycling and support those with cars and needs for parking. I'm hoping that we can still work on that, and I would almost like to see us able to find that off-street parking before we decided to move forward with this one. That's just kind of where I'm at right now. But I feel really encouraged by the work that's been done, and I'm supportive of this idea of northbound on Union and southbound on Winooski from, as currently proposed. If we could solve the parking thing, I think we'd have something. So I'll just offer that for now.
Thanks, Councilor Barlow. Charles.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel fairly similarly to Mark. I really appreciate all the work that you all have clearly done since the last meeting, and the pivot that has taken place. I think is it definitely shows a consideration of the things, the concerns that have been raised, and efforts have been made on that side, and that's very much appreciated. I also echo what somebody said in the comments, the frustration that there seems to be as well with a lot of people that have been involved with this project over the years, that it's being delayed or over its potential delay. But this is a largely working class neighborhood, and public engagement is, it's a privilege. And so I don't think it's necessarily, I don't think we should be surprised that as the rubber starts to hit the road, you're going to find a bunch of, a lot of residents of the neighborhood being like, what, what's happening exactly, and voicing their frustrations at this point. So I think we just need to understand that and have a little patience there. I feel like, at the beginning of this process, I think in the first meeting, for me, I do own a business on North Winooski Avenue, but that doesn't, that honestly, that doesn't really bother me at all. We have a fairly young clientele. We have a bike rack. We participate in bicycle benefits. I actually, the potential of a bike lane that goes from downtown Winooski, past my business as it goes to downtown Burlington is exciting. I think, frankly, I see my standing, like, opposing this would pose a greater risk to my business than the bike lanes being put in. But anyway, I said at the beginning of the process that, the community health center feeding Chittenden outright, Vermont Legal Aid, these nonprofit services on this corridor, if this happens and we in any way inhibit their ability to serve the community, this is a failure. And listening to Jeff McKee talk, and at the end just saying, as this stands, this harms our staff, the people we serve, and the community that we're in. That really struck me. And you're hearing it not just from him, but from other people that work at the community health center, and not just the residents, of the neighborhood. So it's going to be hard. It's tough. I wish that there was a way. Also, listening to him say that the engagement with the community health center seems to have happened kind of like quite late into the process. I wish there was a way to. And again, I understand the frustration with the potential of delaying this, but I wish there was a way to further engage with these nonprofit organizations, figure out a way to, before we start taking away parking to help them manage that parking. Because again, these are organizations that, like he said, they can't just make, they can't build another, a parking structure. These are nonprofit organizations with tight budgets, trying to do as much as they can with as little as they can. And they're incredibly important organizations. If there was a way to further engage with them, try to figure out solutions before this goes into place, that'd be something that I could really, in good conscience, feel supportive of. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Councilor Stromberg.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everybody, for your input. This is very helpful for me. I honestly don't think I could say it better than Charles, but I do deviate in some ways. I mean, I would like to see us move forward tonight because, again, we've really pushed this. I think naturally it's gotten more input and engagement than it would have had we done this earlier. So I do think there are certain entities and individuals that are maybe hearing this kind of late in our process, and for that we should be engaging with them in a very responsible way going forward, and making sure that we are being very transparent in how we're kind of laying everything out timeline wise. But I do think that residents and business owners, we've heard a lot of feedback from people, and it's nice to hear that, especially from you, Charles, and other business owners too, that are kind of open to this. And one thing that I feel is important is that if we continue to hold off on starting this progress and making these changes happen, then I feel like you're not really going to get as accurate I guess feedback as you would as if you were to start it and then people kind of wake up to it and then also engage further on it as it is starting. And to Charles's point of, if we impede or inhibit any type of service or anything that these incredible organizations are putting forth, I think that would cause for, some level of concern and a discussion, and also maybe some alterations moving forward. But I don't think we're going to be able to I think we're just kind of speculating going forward at this point if we don't actually just try. So, I would like to see us move forward on this plan. I am open to the northbound on Union, southbound on Winooski to some extent. I think that's interesting. I might have a few more questions around that. But yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just kind of openly brainstorming, but that's kind of how I feel, and I just want to be transparent about that. So yeah, happy to hear from others as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Stromberg. Anyone else from the committee?
Yeah, if I could butt in, leave my video off because I seem to be having some connection issues, but I hope it's working now. Hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
It's great mix.
Hey, everybody. I really love to see all the sort of continued effort and increase in public comment that we've been getting. And I think to Jane's point, this is really a big leap in faith to sort of set in motion a project like this. And to her point, it does require some action to kick off the whole thing. And I think as far as we deliberate, there's always going to be some sort of opposition and some party that won't be completely satisfied. But as long as we start this, and thank you, Chapin, for drafting up the phased approach. I do like that a lot. That's reassuring. Then more people can learn to adapt, and hopefully in the future, those businesses and people that may need parking spaces more than others can hopefully be prioritized in finding alternative options for them in the future and as we move into phase 2. So those are just sort of my general thoughts. I like the phased approach, and I think we should move forward.
Thank you, Max. Anyone else? Kelly or Kirsten? I know you had a little more to add, but Kelly, anything before we go back to Kirsten?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I appreciate hearing a lot of the public comments. I appreciate how many like bikers have expressed their opinions today. I feel like we haven't heard a lot of that. And coming from Old Spokes Home, of course, I appreciate it. I kind of agree with the sentiment, like I wish there had been more engagement with the nonprofits along North Winooski Avenue during this process. But I also understand like that this has been in process for like 5 years and there needs to be some action to see what's going to happen. Like we can talk about it all we want, but we're not really going to know what's going to happen until we implement something. So I kind of agree with those sentiments. And yeah, I mean, just to talk more about like the representation, just to talk about the mobility audit again and again. So in our Old North End mobility audit, we did find that 30% of the folks we spoke to didn't have access to a car. Like Kirsten pointed out, it was really important for them to have sidewalk infrastructure. They said it would be easier for them if they did have access to a car. That was another thing that came up. And of course, I think that's a reflection of how some of Burlington as a city caters to that car culture. So I think any sort of move we can make towards pedestrian infrastructure is positive in my opinion. I would be curious about the capacity in future projects to work on sidewalk improvements as well. And I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
Thanks, Kelly. Kirsten, and then, well, yeah, Kirsten or Counselor Hanson. All right, Counselor Hanson.
I see you gesturing, Kirsten. I don't know if this is our last chance or we're doing public comment and then coming back to us or not, but I would agree. I'll just go now, I guess. I would agree with Jane and Max and Kelly of, we're very, very deep into this process and over the last 4.5 years, and we've heard a lot of public feedback. I think we need to move to the next phase of the process because we have to remember this doesn't really end with this parking management advisory committee. This is going to the city council and to the Public Works Commission, but I think we should advance it to that next stage of the process. But I know people are trying to give potentially more public comment, so I can save other thoughts for after.
Thanks, Counselor Hanson. Kirsten.
Yes, I just, this goes back to comments on the report. I know that Brian had, some folks had emailed the committee their thoughts about the parking management plan, and Brian said those would be included in the appendices. And I would like to make sure that the petition as well as the letters from the businesses are included in the appendices. And I really think that it's important that the concerns and the challenges that have been expressed by the social service providers, that this will cause them difficulties. It will increase barriers to access for their clients and needs to be reflected so that it's clear the decision, whatever decision the council continues to, go forward with, that they do so understanding the choice, what choice has been made, which would be to impact those providers and the people they serve at this point and juncture. And I guess I have a few more things I'll say, but I'll wait until we come back from the next round of public forum.
Thanks, Kirsten.
Say briefly that we have been combining all the public comment, but we've been receiving them up to this meeting. So we haven't we have not pressed save as and published the full set of comments yet, Kirsten. So I think after this meeting, then we can at least post what we've received up to tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Barlow.
Thanks. I just wanted to respond to this idea of taking a leap of faith. And I appreciate that this process has taken a really long time. It feels like I said earlier, we're really close. So I feel like there is progress being made. But I also think, as Kirsten indicated, it would be irresponsible for us to just move ahead knowing we had significant impacts to stakeholders along the corridor. So it seems like we have to find some. We have to either do it with our eyes open and know that we're going to impact them negatively and be okay with that, or we have to find solutions before we move forward even more. But I do think that we have made significant progress even within the last couple of months. So I'll leave it at that because I know we want to get back to public comment.
Thanks, Councilor Barlow. Charles.
Yeah, kind of echoing what Mark said, but like I'm not terribly comfortable with the idea of a leap of faith. I mean, we've got multiple representatives from the community health center that provide. I mean, to some extent, yes, like the neighborhood will just adapt. You know, you do this, you do it, and we will figure out how to live with it. That is true. And you know, some of that isn't as concerning as others, like, you know, but this is an organization that provides essential health services to folks, you know, largely low income folks. And that's not, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to like accuse anyone of being flippant about that, but it does seem like we're not taking that seriously enough. Yeah, it just doesn't sit right with me. So I just want to like reiterate that we're not talking about like, we're not talking about my restaurant. We're not talking about a house full of college kids. We're talking about a nonprofit organization that provides essential health services to thousands of people in our community, largely low-income folks, and putting, like, you're hearing it from them. This isn't, you know, like this. They're not like, we're not, you know, we're not speculating as to what the impact will be. Like, we're hearing that these are very real impacts that are going to be felt by this organization, and it's going to get in their way of being able to provide these services. And they're not quite sure how they're going to figure out, you know, how to get around that. And so, yeah, it's not, I don't know that that's being taken seriously enough. So I just feel the need to say that again. So, thanks.
Thanks, Charles. I might suggest that we go back to the public forum now, if everybody is good with that. Recognizing the time and that we still want to come back for one more discussion and an action. I might ask that the public forum comments be, yeah, as brief as we can make them. So we might actually try to time these down to, I think Chapin, you had suggested 3 minutes earlier.
I think at this point, if we could, these are, I think, supplemental comments. I think having 2 public forums is generous, and I appreciate it. Want to give people time, but if we could keep it to 90 seconds, just to give everybody a final conclusion, thoughts, and perspectives after this conversation, that would be helpful, so that everybody has time and can still give the attention to these comments and figure out the next step forward, whatever that is.
That works for me. Is the committee okay with that? Kirsten, I see you.
Kirsten had a question.
I'm sorry, I have one more question that I think is important. If you could clarify that before we go to the next public comment period, because I think it is important. So again, could you be clear what the time and the schedule is for the work that is proposed that is not in phase 1? And what would be that? And then not only with that, but what is the process that will happen? What triggers that? When is it? What's that process? And how will people know? And what will be that engagement process if you're truly going to do this phase?
Right.
Thanks.
the way I had envisioned it, and I can lay that out. I have not worked with the council yet, but the concept was that phase one would be the only phase going ahead in the near term, and that we would have phase one on the ground and have a chance to experience that and see what worked, what didn't. And phase one, the reason why phase one is timely is because of the V-Trans paving project. Once that's done, that pressure is gone, and then we can discuss phase two on whatever timeline the council and community feel based on how phase one works, what needs to be addressed. I have no specific plan. I haven't talked to council formally about what phase two would look like. This was a proposal I put forward, given the very real concerns and issues that had been put on the table at the last meeting, and thought that an incremental approach was better than a do it all at once approach.
And I'll just add that the process going forward for any of those future changes would likely involve council again, as Chapin said, and will ultimately come back to the Public Works Commission as well. So this would not be done in a vacuum. There would be a whole other round of public engagement again before phase two would start.
So the engagement would be at those meetings. So you would have to know that it was happening and on the agenda for those meetings, and that's how people would know to clue into that was going to happen.
I think that what I understand Nicole laying out is those are the required steps at public meetings to get something approved. I would fully expect, as we've done here, to have many more public meetings that would afford the public an opportunity to discuss the plans in advance of a Public Works Commission making a decision on a regulatory change of traffic or parking.
Right.
We
Yeah,
have
just trying to
not
provide the
fleshed that
context.
out.
Yeah, this isn't like a decision that staff is just going to make and suddenly surprise people. So yeah, there are those two kind of milestones that I expect, but there will be process leading up to it.
So does it, then why is phase two still in the parking management plan?
At least for my my work, because council directed us to develop a parking management plan for the entire corridor.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's just a little confusing, a lot of moving parts.
Understandable.
Totally agree.
I just want to make sure people understand what, where they're, since they're engaged now, how they can continue their engagement, right?
Yeah, thank you. No, that's an important clarification, and it is good to make sure people know.
Okay.
All right, so Brian, if we can turn it back over to you to help us navigate this, I'll try to be silent in the background, keeping a timer going, and we'll gently try to nudge if we're getting long-winded.
Okay, great, thank you. We have Alec ready to go.
Thank you all for your help on this. I'm sure it's not easy. I just, some other people were asking questions just about particular, like, just clarification. Would that be okay? Real quick, or is this just, oh, okay. I can't remember who said, who answered whether the remaining parking would all be metered or not. I believe the answer was some metered and some unregulated. Does unregulated mean paid or unpaid? Or just not checked or anything at all?
Not signed at all. No
Okay.
regulations. Yep.
What is there, do you know what percentage remaining that would be metered? You said some, so.
First phase would include no metered parking. Any of the metered recommendation would be phase two further down the pike.
Okay, so if I look closer at the phase two projection, I'd be able to find that.
Correct.
Okay. And for Jonathan, where can I find the source of the stats that you're citing about the percentage of vehicle owners in the Old North End or in this proposed area?
We have a few statistics, but most of it comes from Census American Community Survey, the 2019 5-year averages that's presented in a few charts there on page 22 of the report is one of them. And then page 20 of the report is another one of them.
Okay, thank you. last thing, are there any similar projects that have been proposed and implemented somewhere in town, in the city, in in the recent history past?
Yes, definitely. And Alec, I'm happy to follow up with you after the meeting to talk through some of those projects.
Okay. And the very last thing I'll say, and I appreciate your time. One thing that really occurred to me is that if people are worried about biker safety, you have to imagine imagine the same amount of people competing over the half the amount of spots, all slowing down, turning on their blinker, looking around, pulling into the bike lane to maybe find a spot, maybe not using their marker, their blinker, excuse me. If you can just that particular scenario does not seem, and that's assuming all this goes through. I mean, it just doesn't seem to make any sense from even just a safety sake. We all know what we do when we're trying to find a parking space. We pull over, we put on our blinker, hopefully. But in this case, if I'm reading the illustration correctly, you'd be pulling into the bike lane, into and over the bike lane, and probably stopping.
Thank you, Alec. Yeah, we
does that?
yeah.
I would encourage people to think about what the accidents that could potentially happen for that. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words, but I think we all can kind of foresee that. Anyways, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Up next, we have Liz.
Thanks. Actually, Alec's question was mine around, actually, I can point out where there is a table that it shows the percentage of car ownership per household that you link to in your report, Jonathan. It's the footnote on page 33 under Winooski Avenue Corridor Study. And you open that link and the data in the linked table goes to the appendices, and it really contradicts the data in the report around households without cars. It's table 2 under vehicle ownership, and it says the number of household vehicles for 92% of the households is 1 or more vehicle. So I don't understand how you reconcile that data with the data that says like 14% of households and that sort of thing. And then, so that's one thing I wanted to ask. And then, again, I just wanted to say that when you pass, whatever you're going to pass, whatever you're going to recommend to the city council, please include baselines, like the volume of cars parked on side streets, so that you have that baseline count and then you can measure it when the pilot happens. And secondly, there should be key performance indicators, other key performance indicators to measure the impacts, and those key performance indicators should be written down clearly to the city council so that the public knows what they are and how the impact will be measured, including talking to businesses that are low income and immigrant owned. And please include parking parity with Pine Street, which has free 1 and 2 hour parking in between dealer.com and Daedalus. Please add ADA spaces to the single ADA space that exists. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Up next, we have Randy.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, hi. I don't have a lot of comments actually. Thank you. A lot of other folks have spoken, and again, I want to echo my appreciation for what the committee has done, the work you put into this. One of my main things, just I would like folks to maybe try to think as globally as possible, not in a sense globally as it's commonly used, but I guess I do have a little bit of an issue with the idea of, act globally, act globally, sorry, I'm screwing it up anyway, but the idea that we do need to be concerned first and foremost about the folks that are here, right here in our city, And those that have concerns about this plan aren't against bike lanes. Earlier, folks that were were talking about this, wishing that, hoping the city has this commitment to bike lanes and more bike lanes. I don't think we should put by the wayside our commitment to many other things that the city should be, um, that are important to us. You know, affordable rents. Making sure people can afford where they live and prices don't go up because of such things as looking elsewhere for a place to stay because the lack of parking. Um, Supporting the BIPOC community. We've had a very long commitment to that as well. And last but not least, the vitality of this part of our city. We have a decades-long commitment to making sure that the folks who choose to have their businesses and those who provide social services in this area have that opportunity to do that without hindrances. Um, yes, bike lanes, a commitment by the city, but also not dropping those commitments that are also very important. And just a quick comment, Jack mentioned earlier, kind of by way of saying we should be moving forward with this plan, that there's been, quote, plenty of public input. There has been more public input recently, but when you talk about the period of 4.5 to 5 years, there hasn't been a lot of public input during that whole period. Most of the public input, most of the engagement has been in the last months or even weeks. I'm not sure that talking about the longevity of how long this has taken really takes into account the fact that much of the public engagement, much of the public input has happened only in the last several weeks. So that's it. Thank you again.
Thank you, Randy. Up next, we have Jason.
Yep, thank you. I was just trying to make a couple of quick points that I think are necessary. That this isn't a new study. It isn't something we've looked at recently. I was involved in the study in the early 2000s about transforming Winooski Avenue. That's 20 years ago, and we still stand here looking at the same thing, arguing about what's best for everyone around. But I think that making the streets calmer so that cars go slower, so that people who are walking and biking in the neighborhood have a place to be, is a positive thing. And it transforms the neighborhood. And it's hard to see how that will have an effect 5 years down the road, but it will. And so I think that's what everyone has to take into account, is that if we see that just parking and vehicles is the future of the Old North End, it's not going to go very far, because there's a lot of people there who walk and bike, and it's a very vibrant community. I think it'd be even more vibrant if we could have better equity to the public right away in that area. And so I hope everyone considers that with how you vote going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. And those are all the hands that I see.
Great, thank you so much. All right, so we are back at the point of the agenda of the next committee discussion and then asking for an action. We're through the action, we're looking for a majority vote in whatever path you take. And I'm not sure if anybody would like to kick it off, but I will leave it there. Or Chapin, if there's anything else that you want to cover before we jump in.
That sounds good. I do have to put my daughter to bed and need to leave at 8:30. So conversation can continue. I will have to leave it then.
Thank you. Kirsten, I see you're unmuted, but that might just be a continuation from before. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything. Otherwise, anybody else wanted to jump in?
I'd like to make a motion, and I'd like to have the screen, please, to share my motion with the group.
I think Brian has our controls, so we're just gonna Pause just a minute. We'll get this ironed out.
Thank you.
Try now, Kirsten.
Okay. Before I share, I just want to say I had two motions prepared for this evening. And in listening to the dialogue of the evening and the people and the efforts, and in an effort to try to further meet people where they are everywhere on each side of all of this, I'm going to offer this motion in hopes that it is something that we'll be able to discuss and address. This is my second motion, which was the North Winooski. I can read it for folks, or if people feel like they would like it, or I'd like a second maybe, and then allow people time to read it.
I will second that.
So I chose to offer this because I really do feel that the impacts on the social service providers and people who are low income and our BIPOC restaurants and smaller businesses along the corridor have not, their essential parking needs have not really yet been met to accommodate the removal, the bike lanes, which are needed through the removal parking. I'm not saying no, never. I'm suggesting we pause the removal of parking. I'm suggesting that during the pause, Public Works would work with the small businesses and service providers on additional TDM before removing in parking. And that this shall include signed agreements for shared off-street parking to mitigate the loss of parking for residents, businesses, and service providers. Working to make transit service 15-minute headways on this corridor. We talk about really want to change mode shifts. That's really critical to doing so, is making that as an alternative. You're taking away parking and you want people out of their cars, you've got to get to 15-minute modes. Additionally, there are segments of the study area and corridor that don't have transit stops along them. And so particularly in that last block between Archibald and Riverside, I don't believe there's any transit stops there. So that makes that a very difficult place to connect to transit. And then I think, you know, after that effort, it'd be good to come back with a new parking management plan that continues the collaboration that has been occurring in the last several weeks. And really focusing on low-income, immigrant-owned businesses, social service agencies, tenants, and it provides a comprehensive solution to the public for their review and comment. I also am not unaware of the fact that there's an opportunity with the repaving to make improvements to the corridor. And so during the pause, I think the city should take advantage of that. But my approach to how they should take advantage of it is not to stripe the full bike lanes, but is to add sharrows, improve crosswalks, post speed limits of 25 miles an hour. I realize it's probably already 25 miles an hour, but 25-mile-an-hour signs aren't there. And also there's a lot of other signage that could happen with, you know, clear signage that bikes and cars are sharing the lane. I only see this as an interim solution. I really feel that the city should continue to pursue additional resources. This is not in the resolution, but I do fully support that to really completely address the corridor from sidewalks to stormwater to all of the modes. And so I would offer this to the group for their consideration and feedback.
Thank you, Kirsten. Any thoughts or comments from the committee?
Yeah, I'll speak up. As I said, I like the idea of more time for engagement with particularly the nonprofit service providers on the corridor. So if there's an openness to that, I would certainly be in favor. And again, just want to also at the same time acknowledge the frustration that I'm sure that makes a lot of people feel with the potential of slowing down this process, but that's something I'd be open to.
Councilor Barlow.
Yes, I'm also, I also support the idea of slowing down a little bit, but I also don't think that slowing down is necessarily incompatible with getting it done in a way that allows us to take advantage of the VTrans paving. I mean, I'm not sure how far along these conversations are with. I know we don't have firm commitments, but we have conversations, or Director Spencer does, with 3 potential off-street parking providers that could unlock a lot of opportunity here. So, you know, I'm for, until we have a better answer for the concerns of Community Health Center in particular, but some of the other stakeholders along the northern end of the corridor, I'm supportive of a pause. So that's all I have.
Councilor Hanson.
Yeah, I don't support this. I think, you know, Jason Stuffel raised a good point, is that we've been debating and discussing Winooski Ave for, I think, since 2000 was the first study. I wasn't in Burlington at that time, but that's my understanding. It's been debated for over 20 years. We've seen a lot of, you know, this goes to the conversation earlier, but we've seen a lot of data and speculation, and everyone has their own opinion on what the impacts are going to be. None of us know. We'll only know until changes are actually made to the corridor. And what I've seen time and time again with these projects, not only in Burlington, but elsewhere too. And some of us were able to go to Montreal and learn about a lot of the changes that they made there. They made really dramatic changes in a really short amount of time. And there was quite a lot of opposition prior to the changes, but after they were implemented, they were supported. And I think that's in Burlington too, like Colchester Ave and North Avenue, some of these other examples where, you know, these changes are always controversial, essentially, is what I'm getting at. They're always controversial. There's always a lot of competing opinions and strong opinions about what the impacts are going to be. And there's always these concerns that businesses or services are going to be severely damaged, or they won't be able to be accessed in the same way as they were. But when the projects that I've seen that have actually been implemented and have gone in, both in Burlington and elsewhere, have proven to be beneficial and have proven to been a positive change overall when you look at safety, well-being, access, equity, climate, and all these other concerns. I've never seen us kind of go back, like once a project's in, and say, oh, this was bad, we're going to have to reverse it. I haven't seen that happen. And I think, you know, at this point, we essentially have to decide, like, we're never going to know exactly what the outcome is going to be unless we move forward. And we've been talking about this for so long. And even the time I've been involved, I think maybe 4 years and a few months since the first public meeting I attended, there have been a lot of voices. I think someone said that the public input just started, but I remember going to meetings with over 100 people, far larger than this, where we were debating and discussing this. And I worked with some students at UVM who did an extensive survey along the entirety of Winooski Avenue, and they talked to hundreds of people, and they had hundreds of petition signers, supporting the implementation of this. And they had testimonials from a lot of folks who had been injured on the corridor trying to get around, or who didn't feel safe enough to even try to bike on the corridor, and a lot of concerns. So I just feel like it's, at the end of the day, it's a debate of looking at the status quo of what's there now and how it operates and what are the impacts of that, and then speculating about what we're going to see. So it's none of us have perfect information. None of us know, but I would argue that we are in a climate emergency, and we're going to have to really change our transportation systems dramatically, not just on this corridor, but throughout the city and throughout the world. And it's going to be a lot different, and it's going to have to be a lot different if we're going to actually really take this crisis seriously and move forward. And so I think for that and a number of other reasons, I think we should move forward. I don't think we should continue to pause this further after we've been discussing it for so long. Thanks.
Kelly, you are next.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess with this motion, I'm wondering about the capacity of RSG and the RPC to kind of pause and go into this sort of like more in-depth engagement process with like the community health centers and other nonprofits and residents along the corridor. I'm also wondering the capacity, the room for the committee to be able to have input on that going forward if this motion was approved. And I'm also wondering about, this might be kind of a dumb question, but I'm wondering about pilot projects. I know a few years ago, there were pilot projects downtown that turned it into more permanent bike lanes just because they had a positive impact and lowered crashes significantly. I'm wondering if a pilot sort of bike lane would be a better compromise, just to see how it really does affect like the community health center parking situation, if we did decide to pause and try other solutions before moving forward. But yeah, just a couple questions.
I'll try to answer some of those questions before even Jonathan or Brian, maybe. I think, yeah, in terms of capacity of any of the project team here, it'll definitely be something we'll have to talk about. I'd say it's too early to know how it would unfold, if it would look the same with the project team that we have now, or if this would be a city-led effort. And even in the city, hard to know how much would be within DPW, or if we need some other city partners to help with some of the things that are listed here. And the question about the pilot, definitely something we can consider, and at least in my time with the city, there's been a long history of pilot projects. So definitely something we could entertain as an alternative. Charles.
I guess I hadn't even thought about the idea of a pilot. That's another thing that I'd be totally in favor of, that I see the potential of, like if you look at from, what is it? It's, is it as far up as Archibald, or does it start at Union, the bike lane where there is parking to the right of it? Where, could we potentially put a painted bike lane, keep the parking on North Winooski Avenue, continue to work with community health centers and the other service providers on the corridor, as we sort of like move forward towards realizing the vision of like the fully connected downtown Winooski through downtown Burlington bike lane, which again, like I think we all ultimately want.
And yeah, just to clarify, maybe Charles, I think, so if I'm understanding even Kelly's question, I think the pilot might be between Union and Riverside for basically what was going to be the first phase. So, taking that as a pilot to try bike lanes there while continuing in whatever fashion it is that we would follow up with specific metrics at that point to measure the pilot.
Right. So my question was, could they look like, because the bike lanes, the bike lane that goes from North Street that way, to where there isn't a bike lane, there is parking, on the other side of it. There's like parking and then the bike lane, yes, right?
I'm trying to get oriented with.
Like in front of Barrio, for example,
Mhm.
there's
There's one
some
way.
parking spots. There's parking spots, and then there's a bike lane,
Right.
right? And then there's traffic.
Yep.
It could it potentially look like that further north to Riverside,
So
where
we don't have room to stripe a bike lane in that section to the north without removing one lane of parking.
okay.
Yeah, that section with Barrio, it's just a little bit wider. So we have more, that's why there's no changes recommended for that segment.
All right, any other discussion? Otherwise, we have a motion and we could take a vote on this and then depending on how that turns out, continue our conversations and options.
So I just want to understand, oh, go ahead, Charles, did you have your hand up again?
No, go ahead, Kirsten. And Kirsten, your connection is a little spotty right now. So
Are you suggest?
You might want to turn your video off for just a minute so we can catch up on any lag there.
So I guess, is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Great, no problem. Don't know why wind seems to like mess with my internet. It's the weirdest thing, right? Like, who knew? Since Kelly raised that, I'm wondering if that is like an amendment that she would like to see to this motion, that we consider amongst all these other options that, I have put out here that perhaps over the course of the summer, that there could be a pilot of a bike lane with those fancy planters that you get, and maybe it is a 8-week trial, and we try to really get some data on impacts to the parking and see what happens. And then you could still do I don't know what the schedule is exactly for the state when it comes through in paving. Maybe it's later. Maybe we could try this sooner. I don't know if they're going to be paving in June, or could they be paving in October? I don't know, but it provides a real opportunity. So I don't know if that's something that you would see as a friendly change that I would be amenable to, Kelly.
And maybe before we go there with Kelly, I'll just clarify that I think if we go the route of a pilot, I would encourage everyone to not put too fine of a schedule on that because there are so many unknowns at this point. We'll definitely work on a schedule that is doable, and we'll need some time to basically outline what the pilot would look like, including the schedule, the metrics, what people can expect with that. So I don't want anyone to get too worried about, trying to think through any of the extra details about when or how that may happen. We'll have to come up with that as the next piece, if that's the direction we go.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. I would be more comfortable with the pilot lane. I think it's also an opportunity for, like, as we were saying, maybe folks that live along the corridor that aren't as engaged in this process or don't really know what's going on. They'll know what's going on if there's a pilot lane and learn more and be able to have input. And yeah, I mean, I think that's something I can see being a beneficial kind of compromise in this case.
Councilor Hanson.
So this pilot lane concept, I don't know how that's compatible with the motion, because the motion is to not remove parking right? The pilot lane would have to remove parking, I feel like. So help me understand, I guess, if we're trying to do a motion around a pilot lane.
I would suggest that we pause the permanent removal of parking, and then that would allow more time for Public Works to really work on this off-street parking and maybe really work on some of the transit improvements. And then it could be another bullet point. And to Nicole's point, I don't want to box her in on, on making it happen, but she's done lots of these throughout the city with, I think, you know, with things that aren't permanent. And that's the idea of the pilot. And I know they usually seem like they're maybe 8 to 10 weeks or so. So I would add that as a bullet just for DPW to prepare a temporary pilot.
Yeah, and maybe I will just
In that
clarify again,
section.
like in addition to a schedule there, I would also just ask that you don't box us too much in on a timeline for the pilot. Yeah,
No.
I'll be honest, like a schedule to do a real pilot, we would want to give it more than just a few weeks. Like we really need a decent amount of time to really let people adjust to changes and then be able to go back and measure changes. So I'm going to pause there because I know we have a couple other hands up. So I'm going to go to Councilor Barlow.
I like the idea of a pilot. I guess my only comment on a pilot would be to minimize the impacts to stakeholders along that part of the corridor, is to try to you know, collaborate closely with them during, you know, before and during the pilot period, so to make sure that we didn't you know, unduly impact services too much. Because that's essentially why we're doing it, to better understand the impacts, but at the same time, the impacts will be real, potentially, but hopefully, you know, maybe they'll be minimal. We don't know, but we've heard that they could be significant. People have legitimate concerns. So we should, if we do a pilot, just make sure that we coordinate with at least Community Health Center and anybody else on that end of the corridor that could be potentially impacted, even within whatever the pilot time period was.
So just to help this process, I think I see Kirsten typing as we go.
Trying.
Yeah, and I think we have a couple of options here. We can let Kirsten keep trying to like wordsmith this and see if both Kirsten and Councilor Barlow can, since they're both the two that have put forward the motion, can get some friendly language here. Otherwise, we can vote on the motion as it was. If that doesn't pass, we can work on another motion around the pilot. That is an option.
If I can, just from a planning perspective, and I think I've mentioned this before to Councilor Barlow, during pilots, we have to be mindful that parking particularly does take time to change behavior. And that is part of at least what I had hoped to make sure it is represented in the document, and saying that there are short-term impacts for sure and longer-term impacts that we don't know, but that behavior change is fundamentally required in an area that we're removing parking. Now, I understand that there's a desire to add more parking. So a pilot is a short-term nature. And so we have to be really sensitive, if a pilot were to go forward, that there's a honest understanding that it needs to go on long enough to see those changes.
Thanks, Jonathan.
3 months, 6 months? What are we talking?
Kirsten, I don't think we want to pin that down tonight, quite honestly.
Okay, well, I wasn't in there, but it seems like people keep indicating the time is important. So I was leaving that open in the motion.
All right, Councilor Hanson.
Yeah, I guess I don't know. I still don't feel comfortable with this motion because, again, like having been involved in the process for years now, I feel like this committee was specifically created to look at this parking management plan and develop it and get feedback on it and vote on it. And if the committee feels like the parking management plan is not good, then, you know, we can take that vote. But this idea of like, you know, 4 years into this, after that, the first stakeholder committee that was actually looking at the project itself approved it unanimously after the council approved it. I just don't think, I don't think it makes sense at the final stage here for this committee to be making these somewhat dramatic changes to the project itself. I think I think we should express where we're at on this parking management plan that we were tasked with dealing with. And if we say we don't like the parking management plan, it's not good enough, that's fine. But I just think tinkering with the overall project, and not even tinkering, completely changing the overall project, I don't think is the role of this advisory committee. And so I just, I can't support this.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. And as I'm stepping back and thinking about, how this does, add a layer of complexity. There are these two pieces that we've been trying to somewhat coordinate, but kind of keep separate: the parking management plan that you all are tasked with trying to move forward, and what's related to the bike lane work we're trying to move forward separately, but obviously related to this. And it is a tricky spot trying to weave through recommendations from this committee that impact both of them. I think, so I see Max has his hands up. We'll take that comment, but I think I might suggest that we do take a vote on the original motion unless there are clear amendments from Kirsten or Councillor Barlow. And then otherwise, I'll come back with some thoughts about how, based on what I'm hearing, some other things that may be friendly to consider in the parking management plan process. So Max.
Quick comment on the pilot plan. I do think there are a few limitations there in allowing something like that to go through. I do firmly believe that in taking at least the steps of phase one, it will force us to look elsewhere for alternative parking. Specifically, I know of a few places in particular, living on the street, that are very available. There are many places off street. So actually putting a plan in action will, I wholeheartedly believe, set some of these other motions in place to really find other alternatives for the people that really need to use the corridor and to drive to the corridor to access facilities there. So I would motion to go ahead and vote on the original proposition here.
Thank you, Max. Any other discussion before I turn this over for a vote? Councilor Barlow and Kirsten in particular, any friendly amendments that you want to discuss?
I have a question. So is the new bullet about a pilot, is it in or is it out right now?
That is up to you two. I have not heard that you wanted to add that in yet, but Kirsten has offered it there.
Okay, thanks. So I'll assume it's in.
I would, again, leave that up to you. You seconded the original motion. If it really is your level of comfort, if you want to leave it in, we'll take that as a friendly amendment and ask for the vote. Otherwise, we'll take it out. And all right, hearing nothing, is that a friendly? All right, so then I'm going to ask for a vote. Since not everyone's cameras are on, I'm just going to do a call going in the order that I can see people on my screen. So
sorry to interrupt, Nicole, but so what are we voting on? What's on the screen, or what exactly are we voting on? What we're reading on the screen? What
we're reading on the screen is what's been put forward so far. So if you want to take just one more second, maybe start at the top, Kirsten, because we can't quite see all of it there.
Sorry.
Okay. Everybody get a chance to read it? All right. So, Counselor Stromberg.
So this is the.
We are, yeah, so there is a motion, and a
I just
second.
want to be really clear on like what we're doing and if like, are we, I guess I'm just confused because this doesn't feel like it is within the scope of what we were supposed to do. So I'm not really sure, like, are we voting on something else after this? Like, I'm just concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a good question. At least how I read this is that this gives DPW the direction to go to council and the commission to say, we don't have a parking management plan approved by this committee.
Okay. Then I guess I would say yes. Sorry, I just want to be really clear on this. Or so this is saying that we're not proposing anything back to council then.
I don't see so the only is, Christian, if you can scroll up.
Yes, this is what I anticipate would be forwarded to council as the recommendations coming out of this process.
Okay, and then that's it. Then there's nothing else after this. Then okay, then no. Then that's a no from me.
Okay.
Sorry, my bad.
No, it's a helpful clarification.
Sorry, I had too many things open on my screen.
Understandable. Okay, so we've got one no. I'm just going to keep going down my screen. Counselor Barlow.
Yes.
Charles. Sorry, you were muted there. I think you said yes, but.
Yes.
Okay. Counselor Hanson.
No.
Kirsten.
Yes.
Max.
No.
And Kelly.
Am I allowed to say, I would say yes on the contingency that the pilot is recommended? Is that allowed?
The pilot is included in there.
Yes, it says a pilot.
Okay, so that's for sure.
Pilot temporary bike lane on North Winooski Avenue between Union and Riverside to be developed by DPW to better understand impacts.
Okay. I'd say yes.
Okay, so this motion does pass. I will just clarify that this is a bit of a difficult thing that we'll have to move forward because this is directing us to do a pilot without any parking management strategies that you have all endorsed. So we'll see how the next process goes with the council and the commission in terms of what that means. But I did just want to clarify that because I just realized that we have no parking management strategies approved by you all related to the pilot.
Well, I do think that there are parking management strategies that were listed in the resolution, which is continuing to work on off-street parking, continuing to really maybe think, can we get better headways on the transit? Those are things that can continue, I think, and are strategies that were laid out in the plan as being options, right? And that they're feasible options, right? Because you're pursuing them.
I would say transit is not going to be one of our near-term practical solutions that would fit within a timeline for the pilot. But like I said, at this point, I can't.
No, but you could continue, but you could do that simultaneously. There's nothing that says you can't always be pushing for 15-minute headways.
We're constantly, that is constantly on our wish list.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to be clear that that is the direction that we will have to take when we bring this forward to council and not sure what we're bringing to the commission at this point. We don't have any strategies yet that we will be bringing forward, but okay, so we've got a vote. And at this point, I think that really concludes the work of the committee. We will keep you posted on the council's schedule, and if we go to the commission, if they give us any further direction of engaging the committee or pursuing anything else, obviously we will let you know. But any final thoughts, questions?
I just want to clarify something that you said, Nicole.
Yeah.
We will still continue to work on off-street parking options, correct? That's part of what we're going to be doing as part of this pause. This isn't scuttling everything. This is trying to find a way forward and building on what's been done already. This is not trying to undo anything.
Yeah, quite honestly, I have only skimmed the motion. I've spent most of my focus here really trying to make sure you all had a clear process to get through what you needed to. So yeah, I will obviously read this in a lot more detail after to understand what what we as a city are actually doing going forward. But yeah, that's all I can say at this point.
Well, I don't know quite what will go from here, but I appreciate everyone's time over the duration of this plan. And as Councilor Hanson said, there was a significant amount of time during the corridor study, and then now the development through the parking management plan, and acknowledge that it was a very, very difficult picture here. And clearly this is where we're ending up. So I appreciate all of your dedication to this, donating a lot of time.
Yes, I second that. Thank you all very much. And to all the public who has shown up throughout the process. So thanks to everyone for their time, energy, passion, commitment. It's vital to this process.
And I am appreciative of the extra effort and work that the staff has really put in to try and meet this challenging set of circumstances. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody. That concludes our work here, and we'll keep you posted. Good night.
Great.